Hey guys, tonight we're going to play a little game called Time Traveler Survival 101 Tang Dynasty Edition. Picture this. You wake up with a pounding head, surrounded by the smell of incense and the clatter of wooden carts. You're wearing something that feels like a slightly stiff parchment against your skin, and when you look down, you realize your clothes are made of paper. Yep, welcome to 8th century Chang'an, where fashion meets functionality in the most unexpected way. But before we dive in, let's get the housekeeping out of the way. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love imagining all of us connected by these little stories scattered across the globe at different hours. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a dirt road, lined with wooden shops, their signs fluttering in the warm breeze. The first thing you notice is the crowd: merchants, scholars, even a few monks, all wearing robes that rustle faintly, like dry leaves in autumn. But these aren't ordinary fabrics. Up close you can see the faint grid of fibers, the occasional fleck of plant matter embedded in the material. It's paper, but not the thin, fragile stuff you'd scribble a grocery list on. This is thicker, sturdier, almost like a coarse linen, but with a distinct crinkle when someone brushes past you. In the Tang Dynasty, paper wasn't just for books and poetry, though they did love their poetry. Nope, craftsmen figured out how to turn plant fibers into wearable clothing, using a technique called paper clothing, or jie. The most common materials were mulberry bark and tangji, a type of paper made from rattan that was especially tough. These papers were treated with starch or even animal glue to make them more durable, turning a material we'd consider disposable into something that could withstand at least a few months of wear. Contrary to what you might think, paper clothes weren't just for the poor. Sure, farmers and laborers loved them. Cheap, lightweight, perfect for sweating through a day in the fields. But even scholars and monks wore them, especially during the rainy season. Imagine a Confucian scholar sipping tea in a paper robe, debating philosophy while his clothes slowly absorbed the smell of ink and rain. Romantic, right? Though I bet their idea of waterproof was a lot more optimistic than reality. Did people actually wear these things day to day, or was it more of a niche product for specific situations? Some historians point to ancient texts that mention paper clothing being sold in markets, alongside silk and hemp. Others argue that it was mainly used for labor or as a temporary solution during harsh weather. Personally, I'm on the side of yes, they wore them, but with a caveat: you probably wouldn't wear a paper dress to a fancy banquet unless you wanted to make a very bold statement about impermanence. As you wander deeper into the city, you pass a shop where a tailor is working at a wooden table, cutting sheets of yellowish paper with a sharp blade. He's not just making robes. There are paper hats, even sandals made from layered paper pulp, stiffened into shape. A laborer stops by, buys a new tunic, and shrugs it on like it's the most normal thing in the world. You reach out to touch the fabric again, marveling at how it's both delicate and sturdy, like a bridge between the ephemeral and the practical. But here's the thing about paper clothes: they're not going to protect you from a torrential downpour. Sure, the starch treatment might keep you dry for a little while, but eventually you'll be standing there in a soggy, sagging mess, which is why most people paired them with straw capes or oiled cloth wraps when the skies opened up. Think of it as the Tang Dynasty version of layering, function over fashion, but with a side of ingenuity. You follow the sound of laughter to a courtyard where children are playing a game, chasing each other while wearing brightly dyed paper tunics. The colors are muted compared to silk, but there's a charm to them. The orange hue of persimmon juice, the soft green of indigo leaves. One kid trips and lands in a mud puddle, his paper pants tearing at the knee. He cries for a moment, then his mother comes over, patches the tear with a bit of glue and another scrap of paper and sends him back to play. Waste not, want not, even in fashion. As the sun starts to dip below the city walls, You notice the way the paper clothes catch the light, glowing softly like parchment in a hearth. They're a reminder that history isn't just about grand palaces and epic battles. It's about the everyday innovations, the ways people adapted to their world with whatever materials they had. Paper clothes weren't perfect. They stained easily. They didn't last forever. And let's be real, sitting on a splintery wooden bench in paper pants probably wasn't the most comfortable experience, but they were practical, accessible, and surprisingly versatile. So, as you stand there, in the fading light, listening to the city wind through the paper-lined streets, take a moment to appreciate the genius of it all. These weren't just clothes. They were a snapshot of a society that saw potential in something as humble as paper. And hey, if you ever feel like your modern wardrobe is too boring, just remember, the Tang Dynasty had you beat. Now that you've got a feel for what it's like to wear Tang Dynasty paper clothes, let's dive behind the scenes into the workshop where the magic happens. You follow the tailor from yesterday's market, down a narrow alley, the smell of damp earth and fermenting plant matter growing stronger with each step. At the end of the alley is a wooden shed, its walls stained a deep brown from years of steam and glue. Inside, 3 workers are hunched over large wooden vats, stirring what looks like a thick, pulpy soup. This, my friend, is where paper becomes fabric. The first step in making jiaye is sourcing the right materials. Mulberry bark was king in Tang Dynasty papermaking. Its long, flexible fibers made for strong paper that could be woven into cloth. But they didn't stop there. Craftsmen also used hemp, bamboo, and even old rags, a precursor to recycled paper, breaking down the fibers through a process called cooking, boiling the materials in lye or lime to remove impurities. Imagine a medieval version of your kitchen blender, but with more sweat and fewer electrical outlets. To turn this pulpy mess into something wearable, they added a secret ingredient: paper medicine. No, it's not like cough syrup. Think more like a natural adhesive or emulsifier. Some recipes called for slippery plant extracts, like the roots of the Chinese lantern plant, which help the fibers stick together without making the paper too stiff. Others use starch, from rice or wheat, giving the finished product a subtle sheen, and a bit of water resistant. It's like the ancient equivalent of fabric softener, but with a side of botany. Did they weave the paper into cloth, or did they press it into solid sheets and cut it like fabric? Historians are still squabbling over this one. Some argue that finer papers were actually woven from long fibers, creating a textile that looked and felt like linen. Others insist that most paper clothes were made from single-ply sheets, layered and glued for strength. Personally, I think it's a bit of both, like how we use different fabrics for different purposes today. Want a lightweight summer robe? Go for the woven paper. Need something tougher for manual labor? Layer up those sheets. As you watch, one worker dips a wooden frame with a fine mesh screen into the vat, lifting it carefully to let the pulp drain. It's a delicate dance. Too much pulp, and the paper will be thick and lumpy. Too little, and it'll tear at the first tug. He carries the frame to a sunny spot outside, where dozens of half-dried sheets are laid out on bamboo racks, curling slightly at the edges like giant flat pancakes. Another worker takes a sheet that's mostly dry and feeds it into a wooden press, cranking the lever to squeeze out any remaining moisture and smooth the surface. The result is a sheet of paper that's surprisingly supple, with a texture somewhere between craft paper and heavyweight cardstock. But wait, there's more. To make the paper clothes ready, they had to treat it like fabric. Some sheets were brushed with a thin layer of animal glue made from boiled fish or pigskin. Yum, right? To repel light rain, while others were rubbed with fragrant oils to make them softer. You can almost smell the mix of glue, herbs, and sun-baked pulp in the air. It's not exactly a designer perfume, but hey, functionality over fragrance in a workshop. Here's a fun mental image for you. Imagine a Tang Dynasty fashion show, where models strut down a dirt runway in paper dresses, dyed with indigo or turmeric. Their outfits crinkling with each step. The tailor you're watching is humming a tune as he cuts a sheet into a sleeveless tunic, using bone needles to stitch the edges. Wait, stitch paper? Doesn't that tear? But remember, the paper here is thick, almost like leather in some cases, and if a stitch does pull through, you can just patch it with more paper and glue. It's the ultimate DIY wardrobe. But let's talk about durability. How long did these things actually last? If you were a farmer sweating in the fields, probably a month or two before the paper started to fray at the seams. For someone less active, maybe a season or two, not exactly fast fashion by today's standards, but considering it was made from renewable materials and could be recycled into new pulp when worn out, it's got a sustainability angle that modern brands would envy. As the sun climbs higher, the workers take a break, pouring themselves cups of barley tea from a clay jug. You pick up a scrap of leftover paper, running your fingers over its rough surface. It's easy to forget, in our world of synthetic fibers and mass production, how much labor went into every piece of clothing. In the Tang Dynasty, making a paper robe was a labor of love, or at least a labor of necessity. Every sheet was handcrafted, every stitch intentional, and every garment a testament to human ingenuity. So the next time you grab a paper towel or scribble on a notepad, spare a thought for the Tang Dynasty craftsmen, who looked at a pile of plant fibers and saw not just paper, but a way to clothe themselves. They turned something disposable into something wearable, and in doing so wrote a small but fascinating. You step out of the workshop and back into the sun-drenched streets, where the diversity of paper clothing hits you like a warm breeze. Because yes, not all jiai is created equal. Let's play spot the social status. As you wander through Chang'an's bustling markets, up ahead a group of bricklayers are unloading carts. Their paper tunics thick and beige, stained with mud, but patched neatly with darker scraps of paper. Their clothes are all about function. No frills, no fancy dyes, just layers of sturdy bark paper that can withstand bricks rubbing against shoulders and sweat soaking through seams. These are working man's armor, built to last just long enough to earn a day's wage. In Tang society, paper clothes were a class chameleon. Peasants and laborers relied on them for affordability. A silk robe cost as much as a month's grain, while a paper tunic was pocket change. But it wasn't just the poor. Buddhist monks, who vowed to live simply, favored jizi for their vows of poverty. Imagine a monk sitting cross-legged in a mountain temple, his paper robe dyed a muted gray, with indigo whispering sutras, as the fabric rustled like the turning of a sacred text. Practical, yes, but also a statement of devotion. Even scholars and bureaucrats wore paper clothes when no one was looking. Picture a young Confucian student staying up late to write poetry, swapping his silk gown for a lightweight paper robe to avoid getting ink stains on his good clothes. Some texts mention officials wearing paper undergarments as a way to stay cool during scorching summers, hidden beneath layers of formal silk. It's the ancient equivalent of wearing pajamas under a suit, comfort over convention, especially when the emperor isn't around. How mainstream were paper clothes, really? Some historians argue they were a niche product for specific groups, while others point to archaeological finds, like paper fragments in tombs that match descriptions of jiai, as evidence of wider use. Did a noble woman ever dare wear a paper dress to a palace banquet? Probably not. But did she own a paper nightgown for lounging? Maybe. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, a practical garment for everyday life, not high society. You turn a corner and spot a group of nuns tending to a garden, their paper robes white as pressed linen, edged with delicate blue stitching, probably made from higher quality, treated with extra starch to keep the fabric crisp. Unlike the laborers' patched tunics, these are seamless, the paper so fine you can almost see the weave of the fibers. It's a reminder that even within the world of paper clothing, there's a spectrum of quality, from rough-hewn workwear to surprisingly elegant religious attire. Further along, a street vendor is selling something that looks like paper accessories. Hats, shaped like wide umbrellas, sandals with braided paper soles, even small purses made from dyed paper strips. A young girl buys a pink paper hairpin, giggling as she tucks it into her braids. Paper isn't just for clothes here, it's a lifestyle. You wonder if there was a Tang Dynasty version of Paper Fashion Week, where artisans showed off the fanciest, most impractical paper garments. Think a paper silk brocade that dissolves in rain, purely for show. But let's not forget the skeptics. Some contemporary poets mocked paper clothes, comparing them to the transient nature of life, as fleeting as a paper robe in the wind, which probably didn't boost their popularity among the elite. Still, for the majority of Tang citizens who couldn't afford silk or even hemp, paper was a blessing. It let them stay cool in summer, layer up in winter, yes, we'll get to that in a later chapter, and replace their clothes without breaking the bank. You pause to watch a merchant haggle over a bolt of fine paper fabric with a tailor. The merchant insists it's made from mulberry bark, soaked in osmanthus flower water, giving it a subtle fragrance, perfect for scholars who want to smell nice while they write. He boasts it's a luxury version, no doubt priced higher than basic workwear, but still cheaper than silk. So maybe the nobility didn't wear paper to formal events, but they might have indulged in scented paper undershirts, or fancy paper hats, for a day out in the garden. As the morning wears on, you notice the way paper clothes adapt to each person's life. Laborers' clothes grow softer and more fragile with use. Monks' robes stay pristine through careful maintenance, and students' robes end up splattered with ink and tea stains. It's a garment that tells a story, each crease and patch a record of its owner's days. So was paper clothing a universal staple or a practical niche? The jury's still out, but one thing's clear. In a city where silk was a symbol of status, and paper was a humble material, GE bridged the gap between necessity and possibility. It proved that fashion doesn't have to be fancy to be functional, and that even the most ordinary material can be transformed into something that wraps around lives, literally and figuratively. The sun dips lower, and a crisp autumn wind cuts through Chang'an's streets, making you shiver in your lightweight paper tunic. Wait, shouldn't paper be chilly? But as you watch a vendor wrap himself in a layered paper robe, tying it snugly with a cloth belt, you notice he's not trembling like you are. Time to unravel the mystery of Xie as winter wear. Let's dive into how Tang Dynasty folks turned paper into a cozy shield against the cold. Contrary to what you might think, paper clothes weren't just for summer. In colder months, craftsmen made thicker, layered jiaxu by gluing multiple sheets of treated paper together, creating a fabric that trapped heat surprisingly well. Think of it as the ancient version of a down jacket, minus the feathers, plus a lot of plant fibers. Farmers and travelers especially loved these layered robes, which could be worn over hemp or linen for extra warmth, or even alone on milder days. The secret to paper's warmth lies in its fibrous structure. Under a microscope, if we had one in 8th century, those mulberry and bamboo fibers would look like a tangled web, full of tiny air pockets that trap heat. Modern science calls this insulation through air retention, and the Tang Dynasty figured it out centuries early. Some artisans even added a layer of soft plant fluff, like cotton or mulberry silk waste, to the inside of paper robes, turning them into primitive quilts. Imagine snuggling up in a paper coat, lined with fuzzy plant bits. It's like wearing a warm, crinkly cloud. Just how effective were these paper winter clothes compared to wool or fur? Some historians argue that in moderate climates, layered shai was just as good as natural fibers, especially since paper didn't absorb moisture as readily as wool. Sweat, cold after all. Others say it couldn't compete with fur in harsh northern winters, and was mainly used in central and southern China. Personally, I'd bet on it worked, but maybe bring a scarf if you're heading to Mongolia. You follow the vendor into his shop, where he's unpacking a shipment of winter-ready paper robes. These are darker in color, probably dyed with iron oxide to absorb more sunlight, and noticeably thicker, with a texture like heavy cardboard that's been softened by hand. He proudly demonstrates by pouring a little water on the sleeve. It beads up slightly, thanks to a coating of animal fat. Yes, they literally greased the wheels, or the robes, to repel moisture and add an extra layer of insulation. Keeps the wind out, keeps the heat in, he says with a grin, tapping the fabric like it's the latest tech gadget. But here's the thing about layered paper. It's stiff. Walking in a triple-ply paper robe is like moving in a slightly crunchy cardboard box. Functional, but not exactly elegant. That's why most people wore their fancy silk or wool outer layers over paper undershirts and trousers. The paper acted as a thermal base layer, wicking away sweat and trapping body heat, while the outer fabric handled style and weather resistance. It's a smart system, practical for laborers, but also a hidden hack for the middle class who couldn't afford full wool ensembles. You spot a group of travelers resting at an inn, their paper robes drying by the fire. Up close you can see the layers, a thin, soft inner layer for comfort, a thicker middle layer for insulation, and a treated outer layer that's slightly glossy from the oil coating. One traveler complains about his paper collar scratching his neck, but his friend jokes that it's better than freezing in linen. Touche. Did the wealthy ever admit to wearing paper for warmth, or was it strictly a lower-class secret? Some historical texts mention winter paper undershirts in inventories of noble households, but they're listed as utilitarian items, not fashion statements. It's possible that even the elite secretly wore paper layers under their luxurious furs, because let's be real, pride doesn't keep you warm when the temperature drops. As the evening chill sets in, you borrow a layered paper robe from the vendor, feeling the stiffness soften slightly as it molds to your body. By the fire, the crinkling sound fades into the background, and you're surprised by how cozy it feels, like being wrapped in a warm, slightly noisy blanket that smells of earth and old books. It's not the plush comfort of modern fleece, but in a world without central heating, it's a marvel of ingenuity. So, the next time you complain about your jacket not being warm enough, remember the Tang Dynasty folks who turned plant pulp into a wearable heater. They didn't have thermometers or fabric tech, but they had observation and trial and error, plus a healthy dose of necessity is the mother of invention. And hey, if their paper robes could keep them warm through a Chang'an winter, maybe we can all appreciate the humble paper a little more, especially when it's keeping. The next morning, you wake to the patter of rain on the tiled roof above your inn. Great. Perfect timing to test out this whole paper clothes are waterproof theory. You pull on your ZA from yesterday, noting the way the fabric feels slightly stiffer after a night near the fire. As you step into the street, the drizzle turns into a steady rain, and within minutes, you're reminded why modern raincoats are made of plastic, not plant fibers. But wait, some people around you don't look like soggy paper towels. What's their secret? 主流历史知识点. Tang Dynasty craftsmen didn't just throw up their hands and accept soggy robes. Oh no, they got creative. The most common waterproofing method was brushing paper with a thin layer of natural oils or resins. Persimmon juice was a favorite. It's sticky, slightly acidic, and when dried, it creates a semi-transparent barrier that repels light rain. Others used fish glue, yes, boiled fish guts again, mixed with rice starch, which hardened into a flexible coating. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of spray-on waterproofing, but with a much stronger seafood aroma. For heavier rain, some clever souls turned to lacquer. No, not the kind you put on furniture. Natural tree lacquer, which is both waterproof and durable. A few wealthy individuals, or very adventurous monks, had paper robes coated in a thin layer of lacquer, creating a glossy, rain-resistant shell. The downside? It was stiff, expensive, and smelled like a chemistry lab. Also, if you spilled hot tea on it, the lacquer might melt. Fashion over function, I guess. How effective were these treatments really? Some scholars claim that a well-treated paper robe could withstand a light shower, while others argue they were about as useful as a tissue in a storm. Archaeologists have found fragments of oil-treated paper in tombs, but no one's exactly recreated the process to test it thoroughly. My money's on works for drizzle panic-inducing in a downpour. You duck into a market stall, where a vendor is selling rain-ready paper hats. He's proudly demonstrating a hat, treated with persimmon oil, pouring a ladle of water over it. Most of it beads up and rolls off, leaving the hat only slightly damp. Impressive, until a gust of wind sends the hat flying into a puddle, where it promptly turns into a soggy mess. The vendor laughs awkwardly and starts hawking umbrellas instead. Further along, you spot a group of sailors repairing nets, their paper pants rolled up to the knee. Their garments are dark brown, almost leathery, from repeated coatings of fish oil. One sailor notices your curiosity and holds up a scrap of paper. Now stiff and shiny, 3 coats of mackerel oil, he says, grinning. Keeps the waves out, mostly. You can't help but wonder if their clothes double as a deterrent to sharks. But here's the reality. For most Tang citizens, paper clothes and heavy rain didn't mix. When the skies opened up, they'd swap into oiled hemp capes or straw raincoats, leaving their gilet to dry by the fire. Paper was a fair-weather friend, reliable, until Mother Nature threw a tantrum. That didn't stop poets from romanticizing it, though. Imagine a scholar standing in a light rain, his oil-treated paper robe glistening, composing verses about the resilience of paper against heaven's tears. Spoiler, he probably ran for cover after 2 stanzas. Did any social class embrace paper rainwear as a fashion statement? There's a vague mention in one historical text of a princess wearing a lacquered paper cloak to a garden party, but it's likely a joke or a metaphor for her fragile status. More realistically, rainwear was all about pragmatism, not style, even if that pragmatism involved smelling like a fish market. As the rain lets up, you peel off your damp paper tunic and hang it over a fence to dry. The fabric stretches slightly, showing faint cracks in the oil coating, proof that even the best waterproofing had its limits. But in a world where synthetic materials were centuries away, the Tang Dynasty's attempts are surprisingly ingenious. They took a material that's inherently water-soluble and tried to cheat the system, using whatever nature provided: oils, resins, even fish guts. So, while they might not have invented the perfect raincoat, they deserve points for effort. And hey, if you're ever caught in a sudden drizzle, with nothing but a notebook, just remember, the Tang Dynasty would have turned that notebook into a makeshift poncho and called it a day. Necessity meet creativity, with a side of questionable fashion choices. The sun breaks through the clouds, turning the wet streets into mirrors of light. And suddenly, Chang'an's paper clothes come alive in a riot of color. You'd assumed Jai was all beige and gray. But no, around you people are wearing paper tunics dyed in soft pinks, muted greens, and even a deep rich indigo that rivals silk. A young woman walks by in a paper skirt patterned with tiny flowers, the fabric fluttering like a lightweight cotton. Wait, is that fashion? In paper clothes? Let's unpack how the Tang Dynasty turned plant pulp into a canvas for style. Far from being drab workwear, many paper clothes were intentionally decorative. Artisans used natural dyes derived from plants, like indigo, for blue, gardenia fruit, for yellow, and even mulberry bark itself, for earthy tones, to transform plain white paper into vibrant garments. Some robes were even stamped with floral or geometric patterns using wooden blocks, a technique borrowed from their famous block printing tradition. It's like wearing a mini art exhibit, minus the gallery admission fee. For the truly fancy, there was paper embroidery. No, they didn't stitch thread through paper. That would tear it. Instead, craftsmen glued thin strips of dyed paper onto a base robe to create intricate designs. Birds, clouds, even tiny landscapes. Imagine a poet wearing a paper robe with a glued-on mountain scene, sipping wine and reciting verses about the very mountains he's wearing. Meta, right? Was this paper fashion a real trend, or just a niche hobby for artisans? Some texts mention paper clothes being sold in fashionable colors at Chang'an's West Market, suggesting a demand beyond mere practicality. Others argue that bright dyes and patterns were reserved for festivals or special occasions, like how we wear novelty socks on holidays. Personally, I'm inclined to believe that even in a utilitarian garment, humans can't resist adding a little flair, even if it's made of tree bark. You follow the sound of music to a courtyard where a group of performers is rehearsing a dance. Their paper costumes are dazzling, wide-sleeved robes dyed in bold red and gold, with layers of sheer paper lace at the cuffs, created by cutting delicate patterns into thin sheets. As they twirl, the paper catches the light, creating a shimmering effect that's surprisingly elegant. One dancer notices your awe and laughs. "Don't get too close," she warns. "One wrong move, and we'll be shedding petals like cherry blossoms." But here's the catch. Colorful paper clothes weren't as durable as their beige counterparts. The dyes, while natural, faded quickly in the sun, and the glued-on decorations peeled off with repeated wear. That's why most everyday GI stuck to muted tones. Easier to patch, less noticeable when stained. The fancy stuff was for short-lived glory, like a Tang Dynasty version of a prom dress. Stunning for the night, destined for the scrap heap afterward. Did the elite ever acknowledge this paper fashion, or did they turn up their noses at it? There's a story in one historical anecdote about a nobleman mocking a scholar for wearing a dyed paper robe, calling it peasant peacocking, but the scholar reportedly replied, "Better to be a colorful peasant than a boring noble," which sounds like a mic drop moment from 8. You wander into a tailor's shop, where a young apprentice is carefully painting delicate vines onto a paper shirt with a tiny brush. For a wedding, he explains, the groom can't afford silk, but he wants to look like he can. It's a sweet gesture, using humble materials to create something special, even if it only lasts a day. Next to him, a pile of discarded paper scraps awaits recycling into new pulp. Nothing goes to waste in this world. As the afternoon wears on, you notice a group of teenagers showing off their paper accessories, dyed paper belts, woven paper hair ties, even paper patches on their jeans. While Tang Dynasty equivalents, it's a reminder that fashion, no matter the era, is about self-expression, even when your canvas is as unlikely as paper. Maybe they didn't have social media to share their OTD, but they had the streets of Chang'an, and that was audience enough. So while paper clothes would never replace silk in the halls of power, they carved out their own space in the fabric of Tang life. Literally and figuratively, they proved that style doesn't require luxury, just a little imagination and a willingness to embrace the crinkle. And honestly, in a world where fast fashion is king, there's something refreshing about a garment that's both temporary and thoughtfully crafted. The sun sets, and Chang'an's streets take on a quieter, almost solemn hue. You follow the soft glow of lanterns to a temple courtyard, where a small crowd has gathered around a wooden bier. On it lies a deceased elder, wrapped in a pristine white paper robe, its edges trimmed with delicate blue thread. This is Jai in its final role, a garment for the journey beyond. Let's delve into the surprisingly significant place paper clothes held in Tang Dynasty funerals. Here's a twist. Some families didn't just bury or burn paper clothes with the deceased. They also used them in ghost weddings. If a young person died unmarried, relatives would prepare a paper spouse, complete with paper wedding attire, and hold a ceremony to ensure their happiness in the afterlife. Imagine a tiny paper groom in a dyed jai, standing next to his paper bride, both destined for the pyre. It's a sweet, if slightly eerie example of how paper transcended the physical world. In Tang culture, paper clothes were far more than just practical attire. They were symbolic. Buddhists believed that dressing the deceased in ji honored the impermanence of life, while Confucian traditions saw it as a humble yet respectful choice for those who couldn't afford silk shrouds. Many tombs from this era contain clay figurines dressed in paper-like garments, and texts like the Tang Yao mention official regulations for mourning attire, including allowances for paper clothes among the lower classes. Did people only use paper clothes for funerals, or did the practice bleed into everyday life? Some historians argue that the association with death made jiai taboo for the living, pointing to text that warn against wearing white paper robes, a mourning color, in public. Others counter that practical needs outweighed symbolism. After all, most paper clothes weren't white, and the poor couldn't afford to be picky about superstitions. The debate rages on. Was it a garment, or just a versatile fabric that happened to be used in burials? You watch as a monk chants softly, sprinkling incense over the paper robe. Up close you notice the fabric is different from everyday ZA, thinner, almost translucent, with faint gold leaf flakes glued to the sleeves. These aren't meant to last, they're meant to be burned, sending their essence and a deceased spirit to the next world. It's a ritual that ties into the Tang belief in burning offerings, where paper objects became currency or clothing for the dead. But here's the pragmatic side. For families who couldn't afford silk shrouds, paper was a blessing. A high-quality silk robe cost a fortune, while a paper one could be made at home with recycled pulp. Funeral customs often reflect societal hierarchies, and JI offered a way for the lower classes to uphold traditions without financial ruin. Plus, burning paper was cleaner and cheaper than burning real fabric, a win for both the living and the dead. Were there specific funeral-only paper clothes, or did people just use old, worn GI for burials? Archaeological finds show a mix. Some tomb paper robes are intricately decorated, suggesting they were made specifically for the occasion, while others are patched and worn, likely recycled from the deceased's own wardrobe. It's a reminder that even in death, practicality and symbolism walked hand in hand. As the ceremony ends, the family carries the bier to a pyre outside the city walls. The paper robe catches fire quickly, curling into ash with a soft crackle, almost as if it was always meant to return to the earth from which its fibers came. A child watches, wide-eyed, as the flames consume the garment, and you wonder if they'll grow up wearing jia themselves, unfazed by its dual role in life and death. In the end, the Tang Dynasty's use of paper clothes in funerals says as much about life as it does about death. It's a story of balance between reverence and pragmatism, between the ephemeral and the eternal. Paper in its fragility became a bridge between two worlds, carrying both the sweat of laborers and the prayers of mourners. So the next time you see a piece of paper, remember, in 8th century China, it wasn't just a tool for writing or a temporary fashion statement. It was a shroud, a symbol, a way to honor the dead while letting the living thrive. And that, my friends, is the quiet magic of GE, always more than meets the eye. Now that you've seen paper clothes as fashion, funerary attire, and everything in between, let's talk numbers. Because even in the 8th century, style had an economic ripple effect. You wander toward the eastern edge of Chang'an, where the air smells of damp wood, and the rhythmic thudding of pulping mills fills the air. This is the beating heart of Tang Dynasty papermaking, and it's booming, all thanks, in part, to Xi. The demand for paper clothes skyrocketed during the Tang Dynasty, turning papermaking from a niche craft into a major industry. The government even set up official workshops, like the Shefu Supervisor, to oversee production of high-quality paper for both documents and clothing. Mulberry plantations spread across central China, as farmers realized growing mulberry trees for both paper and silk was more profitable than grain in some regions. It's a classic case of supply and demand. When fashion meets function, economies follow. Certain regions became famous for their paper specialties. Zhejiang province, for example, produced tenje, rattan paper, prized for its durability and used in laborers' robes. Sichuan, meanwhile, was known for sandpaper, a softer, more delicate variety, favored by scholars for both writing and lightweight summer JE. Traders would ship these regional papers across the empire, creating a network of supply that tied rural workshops to urban markets. It's like the ancient version of fast fashion, but with more ox carts and less air freight. Did this paper clothing boom lead to environmental strain? Some historians warn that mulberry and bamboo forests might have caused local deforestation, especially in areas with poor soil management. Others argue that Tang farmers practiced sustainable coppicing, cutting branches without killing trees, and rotated crops to keep ecosystems healthy. The jury's still out, but one thing's clear: where there's profit, there's always a tension between progress and preservation. You step into a bustling paper market, where merchants haggle over bales of pulp like modern stockbrokers. A vendor from Guangdong is showing off his water-resistant paper, treated with a secret blend of local plant resins. He claims it's so tough it can survive a full day in the rice paddies. Next to him, a seller from Shanxi is touting her fragrant paper, infused with osmanthus flowers, perfect for noble women's undershirts. It's a marketplace of innovation, driven by the need to make paper clothes better, cheaper, and more desirable. But the economic impact wasn't just about paper makers, tailors, dyers, and even glue makers. Yes, the fish gut folks saw their businesses grow. In Chang'an's textile district, entire streets are dedicated to GA production. One shop specializes in stitching, another in dyeing, another in recycling old paper into new pulp. It's a microeconomy, with each craftsman relying on the next. A laborer can't afford a silk robe, but he can spend a few coins on a paper tunic, supporting a chain of workers from tree to thread. How much did paper clothes actually contribute to the Tang economy? Some scholars estimate that GOE accounted for up to 10% of urban clothing sales in mid-sized cities, while others say it was a marginal sector compared to silk and hemp. What's undeniable is that it provided a low barrier entry into the textile market for small-scale producers. No loom required, just a vat of pulp and a sunny drying rack. As you watch a group of farmers unloading carts of mulberry bark, you realize this isn't just about clothes. It's about a society figuring out how to maximize resources. Paper clothes didn't replace silk or hemp. They complemented them, offering a cheap alternative for those who couldn't afford the real thing. And in doing so, they created jobs, spurred innovation, and even influenced regional economies. So, the next time you hear someone dismiss paper as just for writing, remember the Tang Dynasty. They turned it into an economic powerhouse, one crinkly robe at a time. Whether you were a farmer, a tailor, or a government official, Jai had a way of weaving itself into the fabric of daily life, literally and financially. As you wander through Chang'an's bustling West Market, a flash of vivid blue catches your eye. A merchant's stall decorated with paper lanterns and garments that look familiar, yet distinct. The merchant, dressed in a loose robe with a pattern of cranes, greets you with a smile. "From Nara," he says, gesturing to his wares. Japanese washi clothing, soft as silk, strong as bamboo. Wait a minute, are those paper clothes too? Let's dive into the fascinating cross-cultural story of how Tang Dynasty Jie influenced, or didn't, their Japanese counterparts. During the Tang Dynasty, China was a cultural superpower, and Japan was all about that cross-border inspo. Japanese envoys and monks, like the famous Janjen, spent years in Chang'an, soaking up everything from Buddhism to papermaking. It's almost certain that the idea of paper clothing made its way to Japan via these exchanges. By the Heian period, Japanese craftsmen were producing kamiori, paper weavings, thin washi paper garments worn under kimono for warmth, or as summer layers. Japanese paper clothes had their own twist. While Tang Ji relied on mulberry and rattan, Japan used kozo, mulberry, mitsumata, and gampi plants to make washi, a smoother, more flexible paper. They also developed yuzen dyeing, creating intricate patterns with rice paste resist, turning paper into wearable art. Imagine a Japanese noblewoman in a washi underrobe dyed with cherry blossoms, sipping matcha, while her paper clothes whispered with each movement. Way fancier than your average Chunnan laborer's tunic. Did Japanese paper clothing evolve independently, or was it a direct copy of Tang Dynasty? Some historians point to the timing. Kamiori emerged shortly after Japan's Tang exchanges as proof of influence. Others argue that every culture discovers paper's versatility on its own, like how different societies invented pottery separately. The debate adds a layer of who did it first drama. That's pure academic catnip. You pick up a piece of washi fabric from the store. It's thinner than Tang paper, almost translucent, with a texture like fine linen. The merchant explains it's been treated with nori, seaweed glue, making it both soft and slightly water-resistant. Perfect for tea ceremonies, he says. No sweat stains on silk kimono. It's a far cry from the sturdy practical jai you've seen laborers wear. More like a luxury accessory, a secret layer of comfort beneath opulent robes. But here's the cultural contrast. In Tang China, paper clothes were often the last choice for the poor. In Japan, they became a niche luxury for the elite. Japanese nobles prized kamiori for its lightness and the subtle status symbol of wearing something so delicate, yet intentionally impractical. It's the difference between I need this to survive and I can afford to wear art that might tear if I breathe too hard. Did Japanese kamiori ever serve the same practical purpose as Tang Dynasty? There's evidence of farmers using layered washi as raincoats, similar to Tang oil-treated robes, but most historical records focus on its use among the upper class. Was this a case of a practical invention being co-opted by fashion? Or did Japan simply take the idea and run with it in a different direction? As the merchant packs up his stall, he mentions that in Japan, paper clothes are also used in Shinto rituals. Clean, pure and disposable, perfect for ceremonies honoring the gods. It's an echo of Tang funeral practices, but turned into a sacred tradition. You can't help but smile at how a simple idea, wearable paper, took such different paths in two neighboring cultures, shaped by their values, climates and social structures. So, whether you're a Tang laborer, sweating in layered bark paper, or a Heian noblewoman, enjoying the whisper of washi against your skin, paper clothes tell a story of human creativity, crossing borders. They're a reminder that innovation doesn't exist in a vacuum. It travels, adapts, and reinvents itself, one crinkle and dye job at a time. You wake up back in the modern world, lying in your cozy bed, but the crinkle of paper still echoes in your mind. Wait, no, that's just a museum brochure in your hand. You're actually in a history exhibit, staring at a glass case, holding a fragile fragment of Tang Dynasty paper, its edges browned with age. How did something so practical, so ingrained in daily life, just disappear? Let's unravel the mystery of why Zhai faded from history's wardrobe. The fall of the Tang Dynasty in 1907 AD was a turning point. As the Song Dynasty rose, cotton and linen became more widely available, thanks to improved spinning and weaving techniques. Suddenly, even poor farmers could afford lightweight cotton tunics that were softer, more breathable, and way less crunchy than paper. Silk production also expanded, driven by commercialization, making it a cheaper status symbol. Paper clothes, once a clever workaround, were now outcompeted by fabrics that offered both comfort and durability. But paper didn't disappear from fashion entirely, just got a new job. In the Ming and Qing dynasties, soldiers wore paper armor, layered with cotton and glue, creating a lightweight yet surprisingly bullet-resistant to arrows. Anyway, defense. It was a nod to Jie's legacy, repurposing paper from clothing to protection. Meanwhile, paper found new life in accessories. Fans, hats, even elaborate paper hairdressers for theater performances, proving its versatility lived on in niche uses. Did environmental factors speed GE's demise? Some scholars argue that centuries of mulberry and bamboo harvesting for paper and silk led to deforestation in central China, making raw materials scarcer and more expensive by the Song era. Others counter that textile crops like cotton and hemp were simply more efficient, and paper's role shifted to books and art, a luxury the Tang Dynasty would have understood. The truth is likely a mix of practicality and progress. You trace the museum label with your finger, noting that the last written mention of jie in everyday use is in a 10th century agricultural text, complaining about farmers still wearing paper robes out of habit, not necessity. By the Song, paper was firmly a niche material for scholars, monks, or funerals. It's a classic case of innovation being replaced by better innovation. Once cheaper, more comfortable fabrics hit the market, paper clothes became a relic, like flip phones in a smartphone world. But here's the poetic twist. Paper clothes live on in memory. Tang Dynasty poetry, like Bai Juyi's verses, immortalized Juyi as a symbol of simplicity and transience, a robe of paper, a life of mist, turning them into a metaphor for human fragility. Even today, artists and designers occasionally revisit the concept, creating avant-garde paper fashion that nods to Chang'an's crinkly legacy. It's a reminder that no invention truly disappears. It just waits for the right moment to be rediscovered. Could jie have made a comeback in later dynasties? Some historians imagine a timeline where climate change or resource scarcity forced societies to revisit paper as fabric. But in reality, synthetic fibers like nylon stole that thunder in the 20th century. Still, with modern sustainability trends, who's to say we won't see a paper clothing renaissance someday? Stranger things have happened in fashion. Just look at Crocs. As you leave the museum, the sun shines through the glass doors, and for a moment, you swear you hear the rustle of a paper robe in the breeze. The Tang Dynasty's paper clothes might be gone, but their story isn't just about what they were, it's about what they represented. Ingenuity in the face of limitation, beauty in the everyday, and the quiet magic of turning something as fleeting as paper into a thread that connects us to the past. So, the next time you recycle a piece of paper, spare a thought for the Tang Dynasty laborer who wore it first, the monk who meditated in it, the poet who spilled ink on it. They're all gone, but their crinkly legacy lives on, in museums, in poems, and in the curious minds who still wonder, what? Now, as the story of Tang Dynasty paper clothes fades into the quiet corners of your mind, let's ease into that soft, hazy space between wakefulness and sleep. Imagine the glow of your screen dimming like the last embers of a Chang'an lantern, casting gentle shadows that dance like the rustle of distant paper robes. The hum of your fan blends with the imaginary whispers of ancient streets, where merchants once hawked dyed paper tunics, and monks padded silently in starch-stiffened robes. You're not in a bustling Tang marketplace anymore. You're in your own sanctuary, wrapped in blankets that feel as soft as the finest Juan paper ever treated with rice starch. The day's worries, like rain on untreated paper, simply slide off, leaving you light and unburdened. Think of the Tang craftsmen who turned shupi and hope into clothing, their creativity now a lullaby, reassuring you that even the most fleeting ideas can leave lasting warmth. As your eyes grow heavy, picture a single sheet of mulberry paper floating on a quiet river, carried by time's current, just like your thoughts, gently drifting toward dreams. There's no need to chase them. Let them unfold naturally, like a paper robe settling into the shape of its wearer. The past is a quiet companion now, not a lesson or a story, but a soft reminder that every era, like every sleeper, has its own quiet magic. So breathe in slowly, let your shoulders sink into the mattress, and let the crinkle of history fade into the silence. You're safe here, in this moment, where the past and present meet in the gentle rhythm of your breath. Sleep now, and let your dreams wander through streets paved with paper and starlight, where every step is a whisper, and every thought is as light as a summer breeze through Jia. Good night, and may your rest be as soft and timeless as the stories we've shared.